You know, my mom works in an office, and for me, stories like this aren't just content. It's not for use, it's about real experience, it's about what happens behind closed doors. We share these stories so that people can recognize themselves and avoid repeating other people's mistakes. All names, companies, and details are fictional, but essence is all too familiar, right?
She tore through my drawers like she was looking for buried treasure, except her voice was pure venom. Check every inch. She's hiding it in here. She has to be. I watched it unfold from the sidewalk cafe across the street. Half a turkey melt in one hand, phone in the other, screen glowing with a live feed from my office webcam. Elise, my manager for the last 5 years, was standing in the middle of my workspace, flanked by two people from compliance and one poor tech from facilities who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor tiles. They didn't knock. They didn't call. They just barged in like it was a drug bust. If you're already hooked, and I think you might be, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. Seriously, 97% of folks listen without subscribing, and it really helps the team keep sharing these wild stories. Thanks. The camera angle was perfect. Top corner of the ceiling, just behind the hanging track light, facing down across my desk like a hawk circling roadkill. It had sound, too. Elise never asked how I handled security so effortlessly. It never occurred to her I'd rigged the entire office for silent logging, time-stamped playback, and layered encryption. Why would she? I was just the quiet girl in systems, the one who always made it work without complaint, the one she never bothered to CC in the big deal emails, even when I was the one who built the tools they used to send them. 10 years of playing quiet, keeping my head down, doing what no one else could without needing the spotlight. That's who I was at Rhinox. When vendors went dark, when record chains snapped, when compliance walked in with clipboards and matching blazers, everyone pointed to me. I never missed a checksum, never misplaced a log, never left a breach. I was the ghost in the infrastructure. And for the last 3 years, I'd been quietly building something different. A parallel framework beneath our existing systems, a self-auditing backbone that tracked the integrity of every project file, every vendor chain, every access point. Traceable, transparent, tamper-proof. It was the kind of thing no one notices until suddenly everything hinges on it. And it was entirely my idea. No committee, no input. Just 10,000 cups of burnt office coffee and a stubborn streak that didn't care about credit. The only working version of that framework, real-time, fully operational, was locked to my login with a tripwire hash system. Elise didn't have the keys. No one did. That's what made the whole thing so rich, because I'd seen the signs. 2 weeks ago, I flagged a checksum discrepancy in one of our older compliance archives. It was minor. Too minor, like someone had tried to replicate an archive without triggering any alerts. Elise brushed me off like I was paranoid. Version control weirdness, she called it. But she didn't realize the system I built logged everything. And I mean everything. Access overrides, keystrokes, device IDs, hell. Even her Bluetooth earbuds got flagged last Thursday when she loitered near my desk after hours. What she thought was just another harmless power play, cutting corners to look good to the board, was setting off quiet alarms in a system she didn't even know existed. A system I'd built not just to track data, but to protect it from people like her. I didn't confront her. I didn't file a report. I just made a copy of the logs, encrypted them under my legal name, and backed them to a private cloud vault tied to a holding firm no one could trace. Then I waited. And sure enough, here she was now, flipping through my files like a raccoon in a trash bin, yelling about leaks and duplicate chains and compliance breaches. The compliance guys didn't look convinced. One of them kept glancing at the camera, red light glowing steadily above Elise's head. She never noticed. Or maybe she assumed it was just for show. But that little red light? It was logging every word, every drawer opened, every file lifted. And in about 5 minutes, one of them was going to find a flash drive buried under a stack of legal pads that would change everything. I leaned back in my cafe chair, wiped my hands on a napkin, and took a sip of watered-down soda. She thought she was finally catching me in something. What she didn't realize was that I had written the script 3 weeks ago, and she had just walked into the first scene. It started with a checksum, a tiny blip. Most people would have missed it, Hell, most people wouldn't have checked in the first place. But I'd been reviewing archived compliance folders ahead of the quarterly audit, doing the kind of obsessive cross-referencing no one else ever bothered with. And that's when I spotted it. One chain log with a mismatched value. It wasn't wrong. It was different. Subtle enough to blend in with the normal versioning noise, but something about the timing. It didn't sit right. I flagged it in the system and sent a note up to Elise. Her reply was so fast it felt rehearsed. Probably just version control weirdness. Let it go. No explanation, no follow-up, no concern. But I couldn't let it go. Not when it was part of a sealed archive chain we hadn't touched in nearly 6 months. And not when the timestamp on the altered version was from 9:26 p.m. A full 3 hours after I'd logged out for the day and left my badge in the dock. So I did what I always do when something doesn't smell right. I dug deeper. The more I pulled, the uglier it got. Someone had copied the original archive, renamed it, adjusted the metadata just enough to slip under our normal system filters, and then replaced a chunk of the internal vendor logs. It was precise. Sloppy people don't work like this. This was methodical. It was someone who knew what they were looking for, and that someone had used an override to access my terminal. Elise. She had override clearance for emergencies only, a fail-safe we built into the system in case of illness, accident, or literal disaster, not for after-hours tampering to cover whatever deal she was patching together behind closed doors. What she didn't know was that the system I'd built was layered with invisible watermark logs. Every keystroke, every access session, every file that was opened, duplicated, renamed, or altered. It all triggered encrypted ghost entries stored in redundant logs no one even knew existed. Not even IT. I'd buried them under innocuous system functions like print spooling and cache dumps, and every single thing Elise did was sitting there, waiting, labeled with her device ID and time stamped down to the millisecond. I sat there staring at the logs, my heart oddly still. No panic, just a strange glacial quiet, like watching a slow-motion car crash you'd predicted for months finally unfold in front of you. I didn't call her out, didn't write a complaint. I didn't even tell IT, because I knew how this would play out if I went through official channels. She'd spin it. She always did. Elise had a talent for taking mud and turning it into marble with the right words, so I made a choice. I packaged the watermark logs into a sealed folder, encrypted it under my full legal name, and uploaded it to a secure cloud vault linked to a holding company I'd registered 2 years ago, just in case. Then I wrote up a clean daily report, sent a chipper email to Elise thanking her for clarifying the versioning issue, and got back to work like nothing had happened. Because the thing about people like Elise, they always go too far. They don't stop at one lie. They build a scaffolding of them and assume no one's watching. That's their fatal flaw. They forget about the quiet people, the ones who keep the lights on, the ones who design the system, not just use it. So I waited. I waited while she got bolder, while the access logs stacked up, while the duplicate files started appearing in other chains, while she tried to reverse engineer something she didn't understand and hadn't built. And when the timing was perfect, when I was just far enough from my desk and she was just desperate enough to try something reckless, I made sure the camera was on, the bait was planted, and the clock was ticking. Because the one thing she never figured out was this: I don't need to fight. I just have to let the system do what it was built to do. Record, track, preserve, and wait for the corruption to surface all on its own. I was halfway through my lunch, same Thursday ritual, same little diner 3 blocks from Rhinox, when my phone buzzed. Webcam reactivated, motion detected. I stopped chewing. That alert only triggered if someone physically entered my office and stayed longer than 10 seconds. The live feed connected instantly, and there she was, Elise. Her hair was tied back tight, face pinched, jaw clenched like she was about to perform surgery on a corpse. 2 compliance officers followed her in, flanking a facilities tech who looked way too young to be involved in whatever this was. She didn't knock, didn't hesitate, just barged in like she owned the place. "Check everything," she snapped, heading straight for my desk. "She's hiding a duplicate chain, maybe even leaks. Start with the bottom drawers." They moved like a coordinated SWAT team, only dumber. One officer pulled open my side cabinet, flipping through archived onboarding forms. The other ran a scanner across my monitors and external drives, pausing when the signal pinged off my USB hub. The facility's tech, poor kid, looked like he was just praying not to get fired over this. My legal pads, my binders, even the stupid drawer where I kept old granola bars and cough drops, nothing was safe. But what none of them noticed? The little matte black webcam above my door. The one Elise had approved a year ago for visual trace integrity during after-hours vendor calls. It had a red light on the side. Steady, unwavering. That light stayed lit unless you unplugged the whole thing. And I'd sealed the port with resin. It wasn't going anywhere, and it recorded sound. Clear, crisp, beautifully damning sound. Elise, one of the officers murmured, holding up a flash drive he'd pulled from under a legal pad. Got something. She snatched it from his hand. There it is. Oh, you absolute idiot, you arrogant, corner-cutting idiot, because that flash drive wasn't hidden. I'd placed it there, deliberately. The name on the folder inside read, Chain Backup Final, just vague enough to tempt someone reckless enough to think they'd found a smoking gun. And Elise was exactly that brand of reckless. I watched her plug it into a company-issued laptop she'd brought with her, hands trembling just enough to betray the cracks beneath her performance. She double-clicked. The folder opened. One file inside. Nice try.pdf. She clicked it. The screen turned white. A single page, black text. Nothing more. Unlawful access. Detected this workstation, logs all activity, smile for the audit. For a second, just 1 second, she went totally still. No yelling, no pivoting, no spin, just stillness. Then her eyes flicked up, past the laptop, past the compliance officers, to the glowing red light above the door. She knew, right then. She knew she'd just walked into something built by someone who didn't leave things to chance, someone who didn't bluff. I sat in that diner booth, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched, because this wasn't my panic to carry anymore. This was hers. The officers were whispering now, asking her if she wanted to pause, if she needed to notify legal. One of them glanced toward the camera. Elise shook her head, shoved the laptop into her bag, and barked, "Keep searching." But the damage was already done, not because they found something, but because they didn't find what they were expecting, because every drawer they opened, every binder they flipped, every scan they ran, none of it gave them the leak they were desperate to pin on me. All they had now was a recording, a very, very clear one. I tapped my phone, ended the stream, and picked up my iced tea with a hand that no longer shook. She wanted to make a public show of catching me. Instead, she'd just stepped into an audit I hadn't even had to schedule. The moment the officer lifted the flash drive from beneath my legal pad, time seemed to thicken. I saw it all through the lens of the webcam feed I'd already stopped watching, because I didn't need to anymore. I already knew what was about to happen. That little black rectangle wasn't evidence. It was choreography. "Found this," the officer said, holding it up like a trophy. Elise snatched it out of his hand with a sharp inhale, like someone grabbing a life preserver. "There it is," she said, almost relieved. That's what I was talking about. My pulse didn't spike. My breathing didn't change, because I had put that drive there myself 3 nights earlier, while the floor cleaners were still vacuuming the hall and the building was humming with that late evening hum that only people who work too much ever hear. I'd slid it under the edge of the legal pad just far enough to be discovered, but not obvious enough to look planted. The folder name alone was bait. Chain Backup Final. She'd never be able to resist it. I watched as she shoved the drive into the laptop she'd brought with her, fingers shaking now just slightly. The compliance officers leaned in. The facility's tech took an unconscious step back. The room had that charged quiet that comes right before a lie collapses. The file opened automatically. White screen, black text. Unlawful access detected this workstation. Logs all activity. Smile for the audit. That was it. No watermark. No animation, no sound effect, just truth, blunt and clean. Elise froze. Not the dramatic kind of freeze you see in movies. No gasp, no clutching pearls. Just a sudden absence of motion, like someone had pulled the plug on her nervous system. Her eyes darted to the corners of the screen, then up, slowly, toward the camera. And that's when it hit her. Her face drained of color so fast it was almost impressive. The confidence drained with it. The entitlement. The practiced authority she wore like a tailored blazer. All of it peeled off in real time, leaving behind a woman who suddenly realized she was standing in the middle of her own paper trail. One of the compliance officers cleared his throat. "Elise, what exactly are we looking at here?" She didn't answer. The other officer shifted his weight. "This message implies a logging system. Is that accurate?" She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. I don't know what this is. She must have..." Her voice cracked, just slightly, enough to give her away. I watched her glance again at the camera, not with defiance this time, but calculation. Like she was trying to remember every moment she'd ever been in that room, every late night, every override, every time she'd convinced herself no one would ever know. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because what she didn't understand was that the flash drive was never meant to expose her in that moment. It was a trigger, a pressure test, a way to make her react on record without anyone prompting her. And she'd failed it beautifully. The compliance officers started whispering to each other now. One of them gestured toward the desk. The other nodded slowly, his face tightening with that look people get when they realize they've been standing on a trap door the whole time. "Elise," he said carefully, "we need to pause this search." She snapped her head toward him. "What? No, we're not done. She's hiding." "We need to pause," he repeated, firmer now, "and document what just happened." She looked like she wanted to scream. Instead, she dropped the flash drive on my desk like it burned her and took a step back. That was the moment I knew it had worked. Because the trap wasn't the file. It was the behavior. It was the panic. The assumption, the unauthorized search, the access attempt logged under her credentials, the order she gave that violated 3 internal protocols she herself had signed off on. She thought she was exposing me. What she didn't realize was that the system wasn't watching to see what I'd hidden. It was watching how far she was willing to go to find it. By the time I got back from lunch, Elise was already in the COO's office, spinning her version of the events like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror 100 times. I didn't need to hear the conversation. I already knew how it would go. She's been acting off. Not integrating with the team. Probably hiding something. Elise had always been good at weaponizing ambiguity. She'd seen it work a dozen times before. Just enough doubt, just enough insinuation, and someone like me, quiet, technical, too easy to overlook, gets painted as unstable. But what she didn't account for was how badly she'd rattled the compliance team. They weren't buying it. Not after that flash drive stunt. Not after seeing a red-lit camera blink silently in the corner the entire time they ransacked my space. And definitely not after they saw how Elise reacted when her own reflection stared back at her from the screen. So while she was busy talking in circles upstairs, the compliance lead, Devin, the only one who'd looked even mildly uncomfortable during the search, was pulling logs. Real logs. Deep ones. The kind that don't show up on routine audits. Metadata from user sessions, administrative overrides, file access across restricted partitions. It took him about 30 minutes to find the first override, a forced login from Elise's credentials on my workstation. 2-factor bypassed using emergency admin protocols. Timestamp. 2:47 a.m., exactly 12 days earlier. Her excuse, when asked, was laughable. System bug. I was troubleshooting an after-hours integration issue. It logged me in automatically. Devin didn't even bother responding. He just kept pulling data. Override number 2, 5 days later, again after hours. This time, she accessed a restricted vendor chain archive and exported a PDF with no audit flag, one that had been mysteriously lost during a recent vendor complaint. Override number 3, just 2 nights before the office raid. She cloned a full compliance project folder from my system and renamed the files under a new admin pathway. The digital fingerprint on the final file, her laptop's device ID tagged with her login and authenticated through her VPN session. This wasn't a bug. This was a pattern, and Rhinox didn't tolerate patterns like that. By the time Elise left the COO's office, she was pale. Her voice was tight, her steps uneven. She tried to act normal, walking past my desk like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just been caught trying to frame the person who literally built the system she'd tried to manipulate. I didn't look up. I didn't say a word. I just kept working, fingers moving across the keyboard as if everything was fine, because that was the real twist she hadn't figured out yet. She thought she could rewrite the story in real time, that she could erase evidence, shift blame, control perception. What she didn't understand was that the system she'd tried to use was already miles ahead of her, logging every move, locking every change, and quietly flagging every false step. Compliance spent the rest of the afternoon connecting dots. Device ID traces, session logs, change records. Elise's name was everywhere. And with every click, every recovered file, every time-stamped entry tied directly to her override key, the narrative she'd tried to build started collapsing in on itself. By 5 p.m., the COO had gone silent. By 6, legal was in the building. And by 7, IT sent me a quiet message with one line. She doesn't know it yet, but the system already wrote her exit memo. It was Friday morning when everything snapped into place. Not with a bang, but with a single email Elise thought she'd buried. She had deleted it from her sent folder. She'd even tried to manually wipe the thread from the shared archive. But what she didn't know, what most people didn't know, was that Rhinox's IT leadership had been quietly running backup redundancy checks for the last 18 months using a test program I'd helped design. The system mirrored mail server deletions before they finalized. It wasn't a compliance mandate, it was a precaution. My precaution. And that's how Devin found it. Tucked into a backup archive from 2 weeks earlier. A message Elise had sent to a former vendor we'd blacklisted during a prior audit cycle. The subject line was innocent enough. Updated chain request. But the body? That was the match strike. Elise had written, "Attached is a sanitized chain as discussed. This version excludes audit triggers and red flags. Let me know if you'd be willing to revisit terms. Future considerations welcome." There it was. A deal. A tampered version of the chain I had flagged 2 weeks earlier. No checksum integrity, no audit watermark, just a pretty facade of compliance that would have held up long enough to pass casual inspection, then disappear into a contract nobody reviewed twice. My system had flagged that exact version as compromised the moment she created it. The checksum mismatch had been the canary, the access time, the trigger, the export trail, the smoke. But now they had the fire. Motive, timestamp, intent, plain as day. The vendor didn't respond to the email, not in that thread anyway. Maybe they got cold feet. Maybe they figured something smelled off. But it didn't matter. Elise had already put it in writing, already exposed what she was trying to sell, what she was trying to hide, and worst of all, how far she was willing to go to make it all disappear. When legal saw the email, they didn't say a word. They just slid the printed copy across the table to the COO and waited. He read it twice. His jaw didn't move, but I saw his fingers curl in. Just barely. No one needed to explain the weight of it. You don't have to be in compliance to understand what it means when a senior manager offers falsified documentation in exchange for kickbacks. It's fraud. And worse, it was now indisputably tied to the exact checksum error that launched this entire storm. They cross-referenced everything. The exported file name, the altered chain, the device ID, even the timestamp, 11:19 p.m., the same night I'd logged off and gone home. It was the exact checksum I flagged, the one she told me to ignore, the one she tried to plant on me. The silence in the review room was heavy. Not dramatic, just cold. Heavy with the kind of finality that creeps in when someone realizes the exit door has already been locked behind them. They didn't call her in that day. They didn't need to. The pieces were in motion now. Not because of some outburst, not because someone screamed fraud in a meeting, but because Elise had built her empire on the assumption that no one was looking too closely. But I always was. And now, the system she tried to manipulate had turned her in, without ever raising its voice. All I had to do was build it to tell the truth, and wait for her to lie. Monday morning, I walked back into the building like nothing had happened. No victory lap, no smug looks, just a quiet return to the desk they'd torn apart 4 days earlier. I passed Elise's office on the way in. Empty. Door cracked, light off, blinds drawn tight like no one had ever occupied it at all. Devin from compliance caught my eye near the stairwell and gave me a subtle nod. No words. Just that look you give someone after a fire's been put out, but the smoke still lingers. When I got to my desk, IT had left a simple note taped to my monitor. Elise has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Camera still recording, folder logs preserved. I didn't smile. I didn't feel anything like relief, because I knew Elise and I knew this wasn't over. Sure enough, just after 2 that afternoon, one of the junior techs from security flagged an alert. Unauthorized badge access to the 3rd floor. It wasn't blocked. She hadn't been formally terminated after all, but it triggered a ping to my watch list anyway. Elise was back in the building, and she was headed to my office. I didn't move, just walked with Devon and the head of security to the monitoring room and pulled up the live feed. There she was. Same heels, same blazer, a little less posture this time. She moved like she was walking through mud. No confidence, no command. Just this exhausted, jittery determination, like she was chasing a thread that was already unraveling in her hands. She opened my door without hesitation and stepped inside. My chair still faced the screen. The room was still, silent. She sat down slowly, then opened my laptop and froze. On the screen was her own face, staring directly back at her. Paused on the frame where she held the flash drive, mouth slightly open, eyes already starting to understand what was happening. That one frame, burned in time, had been queued up since Thursday afternoon, because I had left it that way, on purpose. Her eyes scanned the screen, then darted toward the webcam, still glowing with its tiny red light. She didn't move for a solid 10 seconds. Didn't reach for the power button, didn't try to close the window. She just sat there, sinking into that quiet horror only people with too many secrets truly understand. And then she shut the lid. No words, no tantrum, just the soft click of the laptop closing like the sound of a casket sealing. She stood, turned, and left the room. No files in hand, no flash drive this time, just silence. We watched her walk back down the hall on the security cams. She didn't stop to speak to anyone, didn't even make it to the elevator. She took the stairs, and when she passed the main lobby camera, I saw it, the look. Not fear, not anger, resignation, the kind that settles into someone who finally understands the system they thought they controlled was never built for them. It was built to outlast them. She thought the story ended when she left on Friday, but she never understood that the real story was still running, still recording, still waiting for her to look into the lens one last time and see the truth staring back. Thursday's internal review wasn't just a meeting, it was a reckoning. Elise walked in 30 minutes late, flanked by a stiff-suited man whose tie screamed hourly billing. She didn't look at me, didn't look at Devin, didn't even glance toward the head of security sitting 2 seats down. Just kept her gaze locked on the conference table like it might open up and swallow her whole if she stared hard enough. Her lawyers started first, posturing about process violations, questionable surveillance, and entrapment under duress. Said the whole thing smelled like retaliation, that I'd engineered a digital trap and weaponized internal systems to manufacture suspicion. I didn't say a word, didn't flinch, didn't even shift in my seat, because I knew what was coming. Rhinox's general counsel, Marcus, didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just calmly slid a tablet across the table, tapped the screen once, and connected to the room's main display. "Let's walk through this together," he said, with the patience of someone about to pull the curtain back on a magic trick. The first clip played. There was Elise, bursting into my office during my lunch break. The timestamp in the corner ticking along quietly. She barked at the compliance officers. "Check every inch. She's hiding a duplicate chain, maybe even leaks." Click. Next clip. Flash drive discovery. She grabs it. There it is. Click. Her plugging it into the laptop. The moment her face locks up, the words glowing on the screen, unlawful access. Detected this workstation, logs all activity, smile for the audit click, now a split screen, left. Her rummaging through my desk. Right. Footage from 2 weeks earlier, 2:47 a.m. Her login credentials typed into my workstation, her entering the override, her mouse hovering over a file labeled Project Chain Archive. The room fell quiet and stayed that way. 10 full seconds. You could have heard a breath hitch halfway across the building. Her lawyer opened his mouth, but Marcus cut him off. "Would you like to see the next sequence?" he asked. "It contains the backup email exchange with the vendor, along with export logs, checksum comparisons, and unapproved device access times." The lawyer paused. Elise didn't speak. She looked stunned, but not surprised. Like a part of her had known this was coming the entire time, but hoped maybe, just maybe, the system wasn't as smart as she feared. Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands calmly. "You claimed you were entrapped. Yet here we see voluntary override access, unauthorized surveillance claims that collapse under our own device logs, and a consistent pattern of actions that align perfectly with tampered archive metadata." Still, she didn't speak. Devin cleared his throat softly and added, "This isn't a setup, Elise. This is what happens when a system works as it's designed. You weren't baited. You walked into a room you thought was dark and turned on the light yourself." The lawyer requested a break. Marcus granted it. Elise stood too quickly, chair legs screeching against the polished floor. She looked around the room, finally, truly looked, and realized not a single person was making eye contact. Not because they hated her, but because they saw her now, fully, naked in the truth. There was no saving spin, no misunderstood moment, no excuse left unturned. The camera had caught her, the logs had tracked her, and the system she tried to use as a weapon had calmly and methodically documented every move she made. She walked out of the room like she didn't know whether to run or vanish. I stayed seated. I didn't need to move, because this wasn't just her fall. This was the moment everyone realized who had built the rails they were still standing on. Elise resigned the following week. No press, no fanfare, no inbox-wide announcement. Just a terse, one-line internal memo from HR. Effective immediately, Elise Corbin will no longer serve as Director of Systems Integration. There was no farewell cake, no send-off in the break room. Just silence, and one empty office with the blinds drawn for good. Officially, no charges were filed. Not yet, anyway. The legal team was still coordinating with external auditors and quietly flagging every vendor Elise had touched in the last fiscal year. But internally, the damage had been done. Trust wasn't broken. It had been audited, documented, and archived in triplicate. Rhinox released a statement to shareholders that Friday evening. A quiet, 2-paragraph disclosure tucked beneath a more attention-grabbing headline about quarterly gains. Rhinox Systems is implementing enhanced internal security protocols following a systems audit. These changes are part of a broader effort to reinforce organizational transparency and safeguard data integrity. I was offered a new contract within hours of Elise's resignation. More money, expanded authority, direct reporting to the board. I read every line, every clause, every flattering sentence, and then I declined. Not out of pride, not even spite, but because I'd already done what I came to do. I built the system, I exposed the rot, and I made sure that the next person who tried to cut corners would walk straight into the same trap Elise did. Instead, I signed a 1-year consulting retainer. Quiet, remote, flexible, and walked. No celebration, no victory speech, just a calm exit under my own terms. I packed my desk in under an hour, handed over my badge, and left behind nothing but a silent, bulletproof system watching over the company like a ghost. In the final audit summary, buried near the end, there was a footnote most people would skip. Final integrity breach flagged by embedded monitoring system authored and maintained by A. Maddox. That was all. No bio, no headshot, no headline. But I didn't need the credit, because the system still carried my code, my logging keys, my watermarks, my tripwires. And when the next Elise comes along, because there's always another Elise, it'll be waiting, unblinking, quiet, patient. She tore apart my desk looking for leverage, but the firewall wasn't in the drawers. It was in the lines of code I buried deep in the network. And in the contract she never thought to read.